from the Fox News Podcast Network. Election Rewind 2000.
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States. And I promised him that I wouldn't call him back this time. I offered to meet with him as soon as possible so that we can start to heal the divisions of the campaign and the contest through which we've just passed. Almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, partisan feeling must yield to patriotism.
What can be viewed as either a dimple or a hanging chad.
Apparently, he's not going to concede. And what is he going to? Is he going to say something? What is he going to say?
And officials are not ruling out military action this time against whoever's to blame for the attack on the Cole.
And I am proud to accept your nomination to be the next Vice President.
They had their chance. They have not led. We will.
The plane carrying Elian Gonzalez just lifted off.
We should build no walls in a futile attempt to keep the world at bay. Walls are for cowards.
They've been working since '88, getting ready for Y2K.
Episode 1, The Dawn of a New Millennium.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute.
The last two vice presidents to be elected to the presidency are George H.W. Bush and Martin Van Buren.
Fox News politics editor Chris Stirewalt.
And there's a reason, is that Americans like change and don't think that parties ought to stay in power indefinitely and all of that jazz. In addition to that barrier that Bush was facing in 1988 was the fact that if you could have personified the soul of the Eastern Republican country club establishment, this was the guy.
We need compromise. We've had dissension. We need harmony. We've had a chorus of discordant voices. For Congress, too, has changed in our time. There's grown a certain divisiveness. We've seen the hard looks and heard the statements in which not each other's ideas are challenged, but each other's motives.
President Bush is a great example of somebody who was not afraid to take that fork in the road, the unknown, the unexpected fork in the road. And he did that his entire life.
Former Chief of Staff to George H.W. Bush, Gene Becker.
He lived life with not only enthusiasm and energy, but with a lot of courage. And the first example would be after he graduated from Yale, and everyone in the family assumed he would go to Wall Street, which is where his father was and his uncle was, and he had a great Wall Street job waiting for him. Instead, he got into a Studebaker and drove to Odessa, Texas, where he and Barbara Bush and George W. lived in a duplex that the other half was occupied by a mother-daughter prostitute team. But he wanted to do something different. He wanted to be adventuresome. And at that point, it was the oil industry. And he was very interested. He had followed his father's path to the Senate, and he ran for office for the first time in 1964. He didn't win, he lost, but he was elected to the House of Representatives in 1966. President Nixon put him in the United Nations, back to DC to head up the RNC, when President Ford offered to make him an ambassador, really as a thank you for helping steer the Republican Party through Watergate. He offered him London, Paris, or Rome. And the man picked Beijing to be the emissary to China, and then back to DC, where he was head of the CIA, and then in 1980, when he became President Reagan's VP. So his career path was a lot of forks in the road, and he would a lot of times take the road less known.
A new breeze is blowing, and the old bipartisanship must be made new again.
Bush, son of a powerful U.S. senator, Bush, the Yaley, Bush, the insider CIA guy. This guy was emblematic of everything that the New Look Republican Party that had evolved out of the Nixon era, the more populist, the more red meat, more socially conservative. Bush was none of that. And he was a throwback to a Republican Party that was approaching extinction. So it made it all the more remarkable that he was able to win in 1988.
Well, I'm going to be there Friday with Phil Graham campaigning around the state. My brother Jeb, his wife Columba, and George P. Bush, another George Bush in our family, who you'll get to see tomorrow night lead the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, will be campaigning in South Texas with Roy Barrera. So you'll see a lot of the Bushes.
George W. Bush literally had an office in the White House, and it wasn't clear at times what his role was.
Journalist and political analyst Juan Williams.
But he was around and an advisor to his father, and obviously with unparalleled access not only to his father, but to his mother, who also had a role to play. It was a regular advisor to President George H.W. Bush. They're a lovely couple. And what you sensed there was that the son was looking for a role.
Texas is vital. I'm convinced George Bush will carry Texas because Texans are going to want a Texan for president, not a guy from Massachusetts. But we're ready to fight.
George W., he was always there for his dad. And it was huge in 1988. George W. literally moved to Washington, D.C. and became, I don't know what his title was, but the senior advisor. He would say he did not run the campaign, but he was his dad's eyes and ears on the campaign team. The first time I met him was a reporter for USA Today, and I went to campaign headquarters to interview him, and he had his feet up on a desk smoking a cigar, and I was absolutely scared to death of him. Scared the hell out of me.
There is a man here who has earned a lasting place in our hearts and in our history. President Reagan, on behalf of our nation, I thank you for the wonderful things that you have done for America.
But remember, George H.W. Bush did something very unusual. He won a third term for his party.
National political correspondent for NPR, Mara Liasson.
He followed a two-term president of his own party, which is extremely hard to do. And I think he's the only modern president who has done that. So usually the country wants a change after 8 years.
The hallmark moment for Bush is the first Gulf War, the first large-scale exercise of American military power since Vietnam, and it is a smashing success.
This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor. Kuwait, a member of the Arab League and a member of the United Nations, was crushed, its people brutalized. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined.
Ticker tape parades, students across the country standing for patriotic rendition of the national anthem, a towering success that created celebrities out of his generals, out of Colin Powell and Norman Schwarzkopf. And Bush pulled it off with international consensus, and it was evidence of what he said was possible in a new world order, that with the Soviet Union gone, that we could develop a world in which liberal democracy of the kind that Western countries enjoyed would become the norm, and that everything would get better and better.
I have stated clearly, repeatedly, that we have to expect and demand and insist that Saddam Hussein comply with the ceasefire agreements. And I don't think we should rule out military force, and that decision has to be made by Mr. Bush. We only have one president at a time.
Bill Clinton was not a national figure by any stretch in the 1980s.
Co-founder of the Dispatch, Jonah Goldberg.
He was the governor of a fairly small state that doesn't usually get into the headlines. It's no knock on Arkansas. But his first real exposure to the limelight, other than a weird spat he had with Jimmy Carter about Cuban refugees in the state was in 1988 when he gave a keynote address at the Democratic Convention.
Mr. Chairman, I'm honored to be here tonight to nominate my friend Michael Dukakis for President of the United States.
It went on longer than the wedding scene.
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.